wanted to, at this point, offer a short welcome. A welcome both to the participants in the debate, to those of you who have left this balmy spring weather to come here this evening to overhear the speakers, and perhaps at the close of the six formal speeches, speak yourself from the floor. Makes me think of something I learned at my great-grandmother's knee, which I could roughly paraphrase: who fears to speak in Easter week. The debate will be ordered according to the rules of the Oxford Union, which calls for, among other things, strange costumery. For additional information on the bizarre folkways of what some would call the old country, Mr. Nicholas O'Shaughnessy from Oxford in England. It is not a fake name, it is his real name. Will give a brief account of the manner in which the debate will be conducted, and perhaps even some indication of the tradition behind this liturgy.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, let me say first what a pleasure it is for the Oxford team to be here in this great republic. My great white queen would like to bring greetings to you. He said he would have loved to be here tonight. I come to this country with a certain amount of innocence. In Great Britain, grass is something we tread on. Boat people are muscular men who row down the river, and a fag is something you put in your mouth and smoke. Oxford, as you might know, is a rather prestigious university, rather like your own. It is indeed famous throughout the civilized world and in Argentina. In Oxford, as you probably imagine, we have many great traditions. Indeed, every time a little kid says, "I don't believe in fairies," someone at Oxford drops down dead. However, as you imagine from what I have said, the tone of our discourse to you tonight will be one of humility. The success of Oxford men and women out of the world was predicted in the Bible, where it says, and I quote, "And the meek shall inherit the earth." I'm afraid it is my unhappy duty to go through a few of the rules of debate with you tonight. One of the first things I'd stress is that debating at Oxford is primarily an exercise in rhetoric and oratorical persuasion. It is, that is to say, an exercise in persuasion, and in that way it is distinct from debating in America, which tends to be much more a type of legalistic reasoning, where the objective is to marshal as much evidence for either side of the proposition as you possibly can. In Oxford debating, you don't need any evidence at all. The words are good enough. Another thing I'd stress is that you're entitled to interrupt the speakers if you burn with indignation what he's saying and wish to make your own point. However, it remains at the discretion of that speaker as to whether to accept your point and listen to you. He can alternatively merely tell you to sit down and shut up. Another legalistic ruse which we have here tonight is the concept of speaking from the cross benches. Now, if you don't agree with either side of a motion, if that is to say you wish to sit on the fence, as I do here tonight, you can tell the House that you think both sides are wrong and you want them to abstain from voting at all on the motion. In other words, by abstaining, they vote for the case you are putting across, which is to say against either halves of the argument. So that is an introduction to some of the rules which are laid out in pellucid prose in this little scrappy handout which we've brought for you. I hope you'll bear in mind that tonight this is a time of great gravity for the British nation. A new race of supermen have taken charge of the globe after the Germans, the Romans, the Argentines are now preparing to conquer all of us. So we will speak with some emotion on the subject of British patriotism here tonight. 1 week ago, no one in Britain had heard of the Falkland Islands. Today, we're going to war on their behalf. But destiny has called the Argentine people from a higher cause than putting meat in cans. It has called them to conquer the British Empire. And I hope there will be a few moments of silence for the Marine Sergeant O'Shaughnessy, who lost a fingernail when being attacked by 4,000 Argentine soldiers. But I want to say something very serious on this subject before we go into the light-hearted debate on a light-hearted issue, Northern Ireland. Well, you'll hear my views on that soon enough. I don't think you'll hiss. I hope, though, the Argentines are listening to me here tonight when I say that they're simply not playing the game in conquering our islands. In one night, they converted those docile, liberal, effete British into the bloodthirsty colonialist power their ancestors were. But the great thing about this war is that it's an old-fashioned war. There are no communists, there are no Muslims, there are no guerrillas, and best of all, there are no Protestants. One thing about this war is absolutely certain, that many thousands of Australians are going to get killed. But I ask myself, I put it to myself, what are those Argentines, how are they going to react when our jolly sailors arrive in their waters? My goodness, we shall teach them not to kiss each other when they win at soccer. There is, however, as I see it, a valid role for the United States in this dispute, and here I want to be absolutely serious. The United States has an important function to play in these coming pregnant weeks. It can sell arms to both sides.
How different the English are. I assume we could acknowledge that even as of today, few of us have heard of the Falkland Islands. I might say just that, having welcomed all who are here, it is a matter of particular regret that one person could not be here, who in her person who could represent both Harvard and Oxford, where she was the Madam President of the Union in 1976. That was the person I knew as Pinky Buto, who assumed her less plebeian name of Benazir when she went to Oxford, and is, for reasons I think known to you all, not permitted to travel rather widely. I'm sure we would enjoy her were she here, because Pinky intended, and continues to tend, I fear, to have outspoken opinions on nearly every matter. I might, before introducing the speakers and indicating the order of worship, call your attention to one of the particular rules of the Oxford Union Society, which will be strictly enforced by the ringing of bells, the stamping of feet, and the raising of eyebrows. Booing or hissing a speaker is both a grave and a pointless discourtesy and an abuse of the forms of the House. Now, we have 6 speakers. You probably have them all listed there. They will appear in a quite different order. The batting order was dramatically changed immediately before we came downstairs. The motion will be proposed by John Bredehoft, who was president of the Harvard Debate Council in 1977 and is presently at the Harvard Law School. Alan Duncan of St. John's College, Oxford, president of the Union in 1979, will then oppose the motion. Christopher Kaiser, president of the Harvard Council in 1981, will speak third. Mr. O'Shaughnessy of Keble, president of the Union in 1978, will speak fourth. William Fouts, president of the Harvard Council in 1977, also at the law school, will speak fifth. And finally, William Hague of Magdalen, president of the Union in 1982, will speak sixth. Each of the speeches will be limited to 10 to 12 minutes. I will have little cards that I will wave at the participants to indicate how close they are coming to the end of their time. The motion for debate will be that the British government's treatment of Northern Ireland is an utter disgrace. Mr. Bredehoft will propose the motion.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend a welcome on behalf of the Harvard Debate Council and on behalf of Chris, Bill, and myself to the gentleman from Oxford and to all of you here this evening, and also to Master Heimert, who, as we all know, is the master of Eliot House, well known to the university as being the last surviving remnant of British colonialism here in Massachusetts. We're particularly pleased to host these presidents of the Oxford Union Society tonight. I have a previous acquaintance with one of the gentlemen. Mr. O'Shaughnessy and myself debated in Australia more years ago than I'd like to remember. I tell people in bars that I'm not nearly that old. And there was an incident there that had unfortunate consequences for all of us. They allowed Nicholas to leave the country so he could be with us here tonight. And we would particularly like to thank Nicholas for his fine 2-minute introduction to what speaking from the crossbenches was. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that 6 presidents or past presidents of the 2 societies have gathered to speak on the same motion, at least since the American Revolution. The British picked the wrong side that time, and I think you'll agree they picked the wrong side tonight. Mr. Chairman, the British government's treatment of Northern Ireland is an utter disgrace. I'll isolate 2 areas in which the British government has not only not accorded Northern Ireland the dignity and simple, what shall we say? In fact, I don't know what to say. I learned this trick from Nicholas. You're supposed to fill in. Not only has the British government not accorded Northern Ireland the dignity of a sovereign state, but it has not even given them the normal human rights that this country, and indeed Britain in paper pronouncements, stands for. I'll isolate 2 particular issues, but before I isolate those issues, there are several things that I would like to indicate that we need not argue for this evening. First of all, we need not defend the acts of all extremists on either side. In particularly, we need not necessarily defend the acts of the Irish Republican Army or anyone else who does anything that we don't like to. That's the good part about this motion. Secondly, we don't have to say that Britain has never done anything good. Even Hitler built autobahns, and the mere fact that Britain may do something good does not mean that their treatment of Northern Ireland has not been an utter disgrace. Finally, we include in our accusations certain actions of the government of Northern Ireland. For the government of Northern Ireland is a British government, and therein lies the rub. The first thing I'd like to discuss this evening are the politics of partition in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has been separate from the Irish Republic, southern half of the island of Ireland, since 1920. And the roots of the present conflict, while extending further back, really take on an added dimension when we come into that third decade, the beginning of the third decade of the 20th century. It is our position tonight that the roots of the present conflict were sown in 1920 by the British government, and that every action, every poor Irishman who suffered since then can trace his sufferings directly to this act of the British government. Even if the government is not a proximate cause today, it is certainly the ultimate cause of the sufferings in Northern Ireland, and that is the disgrace. William Butler Yeats, Meditations in Time of Civil War, wrote about an affable irregular, a heavily built Falstaffian man who comes cracking jokes of civil war as though to die by gunshot were the finest play under the sun. And I think summed up in these phrases is the tragedy of Northern Ireland today. It takes the politics, the political relationship between the governments of Great Britain and the people of Northern Ireland and puts them into a nutshell. The disgrace of Northern Ireland and the disgraceful behavior of Great Britain begin in a very real sense with this partition. In 1920, we had the Government of Ireland Act. This separated the two parts of the country. Before 1920, there were approximately 3,139,688 people in the 26 counties which today comprise the Irish Republic, and approximately 1,250,531 people in the 6 counties that today comprise Northern Ireland. If there were to be an all-Irish parliament elected, the nationalists, the people who want a united Ireland, sometimes equated with the Catholics, would have won that election and sent approximately 144 members to the parliament, as opposed to 44 for the Unionists. Clearly, the Unionists being identified with the Protestants, those individuals who do not want a separate Ireland. Clearly, this is an intolerable situation if you're a Unionist. So what happens? Well, I was an American history major, and back when the Civil War started, there was some discussion in the Maryland legislature about which side Maryland would come down on, the North or the South. What did Abraham Lincoln do? Well, he sent somebody there and got the Maryland legislature together and said, everyone who is for secession, over to that side of the room. People moved over. Everyone who is for remaining with the Union, over to that side of the room. People moved over. Then he said, you guys are under arrest, you guys vote. Well, that's the same sort of thing they did in Northern Ireland in 1920. The lines were drawn to create a Protestant Northern Ireland. Some examples of the politics of partition. First of all, the vote in the Stormont, which was the Irish Parliament, was in favor of the partition. Why was it in favor of the partition? Because people who were not in favor of the partition wouldn't join the Stormont. In order to be in the Stormont, you had to take an oath that said, I will be faithful to my king, or something similar to that. And of course, the people who didn't want to be in Great Britain couldn't take the oath. Secondly, we had pogroms. And you think, we have Protestants and Jews represented on this team. My father's Protestant, my mother's Catholic, and they fight all the time. But you think about pogroms as something that happened in Eastern Europe. Not so. 1920 to 1922, there were pogroms against Catholics in Northern Ireland to drive them out of Northern Ireland across the border into the Republic of Ireland, so that we no longer had the problem of an Irish minority there. 400, estimates vary, 428 is a good figure, people were killed. Almost 2,000 wounded, 23,000 families forced out of the country in order to create a Protestant majority in some parts of Northern Ireland. Third, political manipulation. A good example is the city of Derry, or Londonderry. Derry is what we like to call it. Derry had about 18,000 people who would vote for the nationalist ticket. and about 10,000 people who'd vote for the Unionist ticket. The Unionists, however, were in control of the government before partition. So what did they do? They decided that all the areas where you had Catholics would be one district, all the areas where you had Protestants would be two districts. You vote, what happens? The Protestants get a 2-to-1 majority in the election, even though the Catholics outnumber them by almost 2-to-1 in the actual electorate. And that's the kind of thing that's what's happening in Northern Ireland. The seeds of the conflict today. A final example, the partition itself. And therein lies the ultimate disgrace of Great Britain's behavior in Northern Ireland. W.F. Moneypenny, a correspondent for the Times in Ireland, wrote, "Both nations are essentially Irish. There is at bottom a common ground of sympathy and intelligence. In the very depth of their antagonism is something essentially Irish. The two nations are one nation." In fact, they didn't even do the smart thing, maybe the smart thing, and take Ulster away. No, Ulster was 9 counties, only 6 were made part of Northern Ireland. It is a division that has no rational basis. In fact, the British government's disgraceful behavior in the 1920 partition is the root of the evil in Ireland today. Even if the disgraceful conditions there did not result proximately from governmental whim or caprice, the British governments are still the guilty parties. Even Lloyd George recognized the majority of the people of the two countries prefer being with their southern neighbors to being in the Northern Parliament. If Ulster is to remain a separate community, he says, only by means of coercion can you keep it there. The root of evil in Ireland today is that disgraceful behavior of the British government in the partition itself. The second thing I'd just like to mention, and I don't think it requires much time because we're all familiar with the issue, is that of political repression. 10 years ago, there were 600 political prisoners in Ireland. Today, there are well over 3,000. This did not come about because of an increased rate of arrests for drunk driving. These people are being arrested under special laws, taken to special courts, given specially long sentences by special tribunals, and then when they're in prison, they're denied any official status as special prisoners. Again, belying rationality. There are things in Northern Ireland today that we would not believe civilized human beings can do. Ever hear of the Black Hood? That's if you're being interrogated. You get a hood placed over your head so you don't know who's going to hit you next. Ever hear of a Hightown hat? A Hightown hat is when you find someone on Hightown Road with a hood over their head with a bullet hole through it. And those things happen today in Ireland. And the reason they happen is because, first, of the partition, secondly, because of the intervention of British governmental forces in Northern Ireland. The place is an armed camp. 60 or 70 Catholics have been killed by the army alone. Armies don't kill people in civilized nations, and if they do, it certainly should be called a disgrace. Representative Hamilton Fish, American member of Congress, went to Northern Ireland and said, Belfast is worse than Saigon was in 1968. What we're doing in Northern Ireland, or rather what the British are doing, we're not doing anything in Northern Ireland, is perpetuating a cycle of violence. And that is the true disgrace. And that is the reason, Mr. Chairman, that I propose the motion this evening. Thank you.
Duncan?
In a secluded spot, Mr. Chairman, beside Oxford's Cherwell River, it is traditional for the university's professors to enjoy naked sunbathing. Once, when disturbed by a boatload of female students, the professors took flight, desperately covering themselves with the nearest piece of clothing. One of them, however, wrapped a towel around his head, leaving the rest of himself fully exposed. When challenged for an explanation for this strange reaction, he retorted, "In Oxford, I'm known by my face." It will not surprise you to learn that when in similar circumstances Nicholas O'Shaughnessy was asked why he had stuffed a sock in his mouth, he answered, "In Oxford, I'm known by my voice." It's a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to have as our chairman tonight the master of Harvard's most distinguished house. even if he looks as though he was poured into his tux tonight. And someone forgot to say when. I would like to thank Mr. Brederhoff for his warm welcome. It's a mark of a good speaker that he approached the subject without prejudice and bigotry. On Ireland, it seems that Mr. Brederhoff has a very open mind. You can feel the draft from here. It seems that Mr. Brederhoff is a very good speaker in everything but essentials. I cannot accept that there are political prisoners in the north of Ireland. I cannot accept that partition, the north between the south in Ireland, was forced upon an unwilling Irish citizenship by the colonial hand of the British government. There are two things here which I wish to squash in the course of the 10 minutes I'm allowed before you tonight. He was right, although he only touched upon it, that this is largely an issue of sovereignty. What is the set of boundaries within which a province, an area, is entitled to determine its own sovereignty? Which are the things it has to take into account in the evolution of such an area that justify it taking control of its own affairs by democratic means? I was also rather staggered at the rather flimsy account of history which Mr. Brederhoff gave us, and I think many speakers here, many listeners tonight, lost track of really the argument he was saying. I see some Boston Irish heads nodding in the audience, and I intend fully to address some of my remarks to them tonight. I'm glad they're here, let me say that, because we all on this side of the House approach this argument in a mood of conciliation rather than confrontation. We are desperate to find a solution to the misery, the horror, the bombing, and the outrage which is a daily fact of life in the north of Ireland. Until 60 years ago, Ireland, the whole island, at least legally, was one nation. But let's go right back to see what are the factors which led to the present state of affairs and which led to the government of the United Kingdom finding itself in a very, very difficult position. Ireland was invaded up until the 17th century by Celts, by Vikings, by Normans, all of whom initially tended to merge into one nation. Then in the 1600s, there were English and Scottish settlers, compelled to live there, forced across. They were planted in Ulster, and that I admit because it is a fact of history. The unfortunate characteristic of these immigrants was their fervent Protestantism, at odds with the fervent Catholicism of the rest of the Irish citizens. This division, innate in when there is immigration of that sort, was exacerbated by the likes of the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, when the forces of William of Orange, hence the Orange Order, the Protestant order, defeated the Catholic pretender James II. In 1798, largely the result of a Presbyterian uprising, there was great disorder in Ireland, which led to the Act of Union in 1800, by which Ireland's Parliament was dissolved and it became part of the United Kingdom. Not a colony, part of the United Kingdom with all the attendant rights of government from Westminster. But the fact of the immigration was that there is a distribution of population such that Ulster was only 38% Roman Catholic. Now, the history of antagonism, I quite am prepared to concede, was miserable throughout the 18th century. Persecution, famine, evictions, misery, blight, it was all there. There's no denying it. And the Irish in the USA, many of whose ancestors were forced across here, still feel it. And we can sympathise with that as a fact of history. But Gladstone, in the 19th century, made Home Rule the issue. He sacrificed the Liberal Party for the sake of Home Rule in order to find a solution to the Irish problem. His 1886 bill was defeated. Randolph Churchill, father of Sir Winston, rushed across to Ulster, played the orange card. He said, Ulster will fight, Ulster will be right, because he recognised that a significant majority of the 6 counties of the north wished to remain part of the United Kingdom. And, as has been described, we had, well, you didn't mention it, but we had the 1892, 93, 94 bill. That was defeated in the Lords, and it led to the Irish Free State under an act not in 1922, but in 1920, and the Irish Free State was set up in 1922. Now, there was partition. The partition, the recognising of the fact that a majority of the North wished to remain part of the United Kingdom, was almost inevitable. It was supposed to be temporary. The British government wished to set up a Council of Ireland to try and reconcile the differences. Eamon de Valera, who fought for the independence of the Republic of Ireland, recognised that with Dominion status within the Commonwealth of Great Britain, with the Queen as sovereign, there was a ray of hope that the Irish problem might be solved. So partition, the existence of Northern Ireland as a separate province, had evolved out of the forces of history. Ulster, the majority in Ulster, wanted it. We never manufactured a Protestant majority in Northern Ireland. We didn't manufacture it. They were there. We didn't colonise it in the 19th century. The citizens of Northern Ireland, entitled to the rights of, as with all other citizens in Northern Ireland, have been there as long as most people have been here in America from wherever they came. Now, Ulster proved itself in the forces of history to have a sufficiently distinctive cultural difference to force, as these things happen in history, a separation. And how else does one determine the boundaries of a nation? Should Belgium be annexed to Germany? How do you define the boundaries of a nation? It's not necessarily because it falls within the confines of an island. Now, let's go to the present. We have heard about political prisoners. As with all parts of the British Kingdom, colonial, Kenya, Rhodesia, the Falkland Islands, whatever it is, the British government has said that so long as a majority of people in a clearly defined nation or part of the United Kingdom wish to remain part of the United Kingdom or under general British sovereignty, they are entitled so to do, and the government must recognise its obligations to oversee that country. We can't just give away the north of Ireland against the wishes of the inhabitants. You just throw the whole of Ireland into civil war and turmoil. So, my card is up. I just want to come straight to some very current matters. Even if there was, during the 50 years of Stormont rule, that is to say, largely independent government from 1922 to 72, even if there was a measure of discrimination, it must be said, if you like, it must be said that what discrimination there was the result of people based in the north of Ireland who can only be construed as Irish and of Irish descent. Now, troops out. People say, take the troops out of Northern Ireland. Let us make it quite clear that when, through the civil rights movement, the discrimination in Northern Ireland erupted in 68, the troops were sent in to protect the Catholic minority. I beg your pardon? Bloody Sunday. The fact is, we were not forced to shoot anyone, I accept that. That's what we're about to shout. We did. You cannot accept that troops thrown into Northern Ireland with a completely new style of warfare in 1968 to quell troubles of bombings, kneecappings, whatever it might be, can be expected to control order without there being some casualties. Let me make it quite clear. There are British troops in prison, 19-year-old kids, for having fired a bullet under the greatest pressure when they should not so have done. So too, Yes? They are in prison on the mainland, where, from the Westminster government, we have enforced the law of the land, the civil law of the land, equally and with a fair hand to all who try to commit murder, who try to disrupt the peace to which all citizens of Northern Ireland are entitled.
Point of information.
Yes, I recognise you.
Paratroopers.
I beg your pardon.
Or your crack force, your most experienced soldiers who opened fire in Northern Ireland that day. Not your inexperienced 19-year-olds.
No, let me just... All right, fire away. Excuse me if I have one extra minute in order to answer these
Point
questions.
of information, the people that they fired on were unarmed and in a non-violent march, and 5 of the 15 people that were shot were under 15 years old.
It's a very unfortunate aspect of the Northern Irish position. And it is a salient point to mention to those of you amongst the Irish community who will finance the Irish Republican Army from your donations, possibly out of the best of intentions. You should recognise that the IRA, who are connected to the PLO, you saw it on 60 Minutes perhaps before Christmas, don't interrupt, are in no way that the IRA will stop at nothing in order to fulfil their terrorist objectives and what are quite clearly recognised as Marxist objectives in Northern Ireland. They will even use kids to put explosives in prams to push them along in order to try and blow up troops and then make them run away, and they'll pay them a fiver and they're actually very happy because they've been brought up with it. But this has to be stopped. I'm compelled now to draw to a conclusion. The greatest hope in Northern Ireland, the greatest chance of hope, is for there to be a coming together of attitudes, for the violence to stop, for the IRA to be ruled out. They are the greatest threat to peace. Until such time as the Irish Republican Army cease their bombings and their kneecappings and their shootings and their sectarian assassinations, and until such time as the Orange Order, the Protestants, who are equally guilty in many respects, do the same, there can be no peace in Northern Ireland. The greatest thing you can do is to cut off your aid and to ensure that by some means we can begin political discussions to have a political solution and to set aside our arms in the hope that one day there can be peace in that land.
Mr. Kaiser?
Mr. Chairman, this is not my real voice. I'm very happy to have the Oxford team here tonight. I don't know how many of them know that debate at Harvard has a long history, just as long as it has at Oxford. The history of the Harvard-Oxford debate itself goes back nearly 30 minutes now. Debate at Harvard's been a very important thing for a number of years. I don't know how many people know here that actually every undergraduate is required to be able to speak before he can graduate. And that tradition was started a number of years ago by a very wealthy man, Harry Elkins Widener, who fell off the Titanic and was drowned because he was too inarticulate to cry for help. But really, I want to thank Oxford for being here, for lending a bit of class. Thank them for renting us these tuxedos. John lives in the Bronx, and they don't wear tuxedos there unless they're stolen. There's no such thing as a black tie arson. But this is a serious subject. And Mr. Chairman, in 1972, Amnesty International reported systematic torture by the British government in Northern Ireland. And Mr. Duncan says he cannot accept political prisoners. In 1976, the European Rights Commission found the British government guilty of torture in Northern Ireland. But Mr. Duncan says he cannot accept that there is a nation split apart from its brethren. In 1978, the European Court of Human Rights found Britain guilty of inhumane and degrading treatment in Northern Ireland. But Mr. Duncan says he cannot accept the fact that there are illegal searches and seizures. And in 1978, Amnesty International reported that there was ongoing torture in Northern Ireland. And Mr. Duncan says he cannot accept that there is a denial of basic human rights. Well, Mr. Chairman, we cannot accept that either. We will not. The Oxford team argues that the split of Northern Ireland was not a manufactured split, that is a natural split. Well, that is simply not the case. It was not enough for the British government to go and take a vote of all those in Northern Ireland, to see whether they wanted to secede from England, a vote where 80% of them would have voted to do so. It was not enough for them to take Ulster, 9 counties. Ulster, remember, 9 counties where the majority was Catholic. It was not enough. It was not enough to take the 6 counties with all the Irish and the Catholics. It was not enough to do that. 23,000 were forced out by the Protestants. It was only enough to take 6 particular counties, and in those 6 particular counties where there was a majority of Protestants, and then to take a vote, and then decide whether that nation should split apart. Only when you take the particulars, only when you decide who should vote, does Northern Ireland split apart from the rest of Ireland. It is a manufactured split. There's no question about it. And it's not enough for Mr. Duncan to come here and say that after 60 years of trouble, England has suffered so much in Northern Ireland, so much, the troops have suffered so much being forced to fire under difficult circumstances. That is not enough. That is no answer. Because it is a problem that they themselves have created. Now, I want to discuss something slightly different from what has been discussed so far. Mr. Bredehoff came here and talked a lot about the political reasons why Northern Ireland should not be split apart. I want to talk about some of the things that happen in Northern Ireland. Specifically, I want to talk about the distribution of social services in Northern Ireland. I want to talk about the laws in Northern Ireland and how they treat the Catholics and how they treat the Protestants. It may surprise some of you to know that Mr. Basil Brooke, who was a Prime Minister for Northern Ireland and formerly a Housing Secretary, spoke in front of the Stormont Parliament and said, "I appreciate the great difficulty experienced by some in procuring suitable Protestant labor, but I would point out that Roman Catholics are endeavoring to get in everywhere. And I appeal to loyalists, therefore, wherever possible, to employ good Protestant lads and lassies." That is a speech not by some Protestant on the street, but by Mr. Basil Brooke. And George Eliot, who was a member of the Enniskillen Borough Council, spoke and said, "We are not going to build houses in the South Ward, the Catholic area. We're going to see that the right people are being put in those houses." That's the sort of thing that happens in Northern Ireland. For example, in 1969, there was established a Northern Ireland Economic Council. Yes.
Those speeches were made in the 1960s. Is it fair for us to judge the American government on what happened in the southern states in the 1960s and the 1950s?
The debate tonight is the British government's policy. Government's plural. The debate is a history. The debate is a history of the British treatment in Northern Ireland. Yes, it is absolutely fair. Because it's the treatment during the 60s that creates the problems today. Now, if I may continue. In 1969, the Northern Ireland Economic Council decided to split the area for development into, and this is interesting, into Belfast, the Catholic area, and of course, naturally, the outside Belfast. That's what they called it, outside Belfast, the Protestant area. And then through location of industry and through funds, they decided to increase the Protestant area by 103% and the Catholic area by 43%. They deny systematically jobs to Catholic employees. In Derry, for example, there are 113 tradesmen. 75 of them are Protestant. 28 are Catholic. There are 91 clerical workers. 71 of them are Protestant. 20 of them are Catholic. And there are 61 administrators. 69 administrators. 61 are Protestant and 8 are Catholic. And this in a city where there are 13,000 Catholics and only 9,000 Protestants. Now that is a systematic attempt to deny the right to work to Catholic individuals in Northern Ireland. Specifically what happens is that they attempt to drive the Catholics out of jobs so that they have to emigrate. And slowly, the majority of Protestants in Northern Ireland is increased because of that sort of discrimination. Compare Donegal to Derry, just a few miles away, where the amount of social services, specifically the unemployment benefits and children's allowances, are much higher in the Protestant areas for no particular reason, except that those are Protestant areas, than they are in the Catholic area. And for Ma, where between 1945 and 1970, there were 1,589 houses built, 1,000 of them for Protestants, and only 500 for Catholics.
That is a systematic program of discrimination. And that discrimination is not merely discrimination in terms of housing and in terms of employment. It is discrimination in terms of political repression. In 1922, there was passed in Northern Ireland something called the Special Powers Act. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this act, so I'm going to read you some of the particular provisions. The Special Powers Act says that people in Northern Ireland may be arrested without warrant. It says they may be imprisoned without charge and without trial. It says they may be denied recourse to habeas corpus or court of law. It says they may be denied access to counsel. It says that their houses may be entered and searched with force and without a warrant. It permits punishment by flogging. It denies claim to trial by jury. It prohibits circulation of newspapers. It prohibits inquests after deaths of prisoners. Even Stephen Biko was allowed an inquest after his death. And in fact, the particular laws, these Special Powers Acts passed in Northern Ireland, are the basis. They are the reasoning behind much of what we know in South Africa to be particularly harsh treatment of their political prisoners. In 1968, the South African Department of Foreign Affairs, in a rule of law, quoted the Special Powers Act. And Prime Minister Vorster is famous for saying that the Special Powers Act in Northern Ireland is much stricter than his own internment laws. In fact, it seems that Great Britain, through its policies of Northern Ireland, is a true beacon of tyranny for the entire world. That is the sum of things, the heritage of Great Britain and Ireland. They have divided a nation, they have promoted strife insidiously through force or law or economics. Perhaps if England were to leave the North tomorrow, there would be continued violence. But that violence is part of their own heritage, because they have been weighed in the balance and found wanting in Northern Ireland, and we are left to recognize the horrors and to recall the names of the victims and remember them, to remember specifically what went on in Northern Ireland, as William Butler Yeats did in Easter 1916. Was it needless death? For England may keep faith when all is said and done. We know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and died. But what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in verse. MacDonough and McBride and Pierce and Connolly, and now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. And what is the answer for Mr. Yeats and for the Irish? It is, when all is done and said, that Great Britain has not kept faith. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy will now return, this time for 10 or 12 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I must urge you to abstain from voting on this motion because I think neither side is right. These people over here seek to portray the policy of Britain as being one of unmitigated evil and tyranny. My friends over here defend successive British governments as being broadly correct. Let me propose my solution to the Ulster problem. If you can speak of a solution, I believe in the withdrawal of the British Army, because I believe that violence and torture are integral to any counter-terror campaign and have been part of every one we've ever seen in the 50s and 60s. You had the French in Algeria, you had at an earlier age the Belgian Congo. It is inseparable from a counter-terror campaign that you compromise your national integrity like this. I believe the British military presence in Northern Ireland has become institutionalized and an accepted part of the status quo. What we should press for is simply and clearly an imposed power sharing between responsible Protestant and Catholic leaders, and that they shall govern Northern Ireland until such time as the electorate is responsible enough to make a mature decision. You hiss at me. In 1969, Protestants rampaged through Catholic ghettos in Ulster. 80% of the deaths, 80% of the house burnings were Catholic, done to Catholics by Protestants. Do you call this mature behavior? The reality is that you've got the most enormous sectarian hate, which people in this country just do not understand. Such a country must be given a constitution which has power sharing written into it to guarantee an equal balance of power in the cabinets which govern it between Protestant and Catholic, and furthermore, that as a long-term goal, Irish unity should be seriously considered, because it is probably the only way that the Protestant thugs of Northern Ireland can be persuaded not to persecute their Catholic neighbours. Of course, it is claimed that if Britain left, there would become a bloodbath in Northern Ireland. Ladies and gentlemen, there is already a bloodbath in Northern Ireland, and on a projection of current trends, there will continue to be a bloodbath for the next 50 years. We should convey on them the right to nationhood. The right to nationhood includes the right to civil fratricide, and we impliedly recognized this when we gave independence to such sectarianly divided countries as India and Nigeria. We should simply trust them.
Point of information. Doesn't the gentleman recognize that when independence was given to India, it was on the condition of a division into a Muslim state and a Hindu state?
Of course it was on the condition of division. That's the only type of independence India would accept. And about 1 million people were killed in the sectarian riots which followed. I, however, must disagree with the people on this side of the House who are proposing this motion, because I think they simply underestimate the complexity of the problem which Britain has faced for the past 10 years. They also seek to blame the current British government for the misdeeds of earlier generations of people. The media of this country have sought to portray this as a colonial problem. I cannot really believe that the effete liberal democracy I was brought up in is a great imperialist tyrant which wants to work these people to the bone and enjoy the fruits of their labour. I really don't understand the meaning of that remark. I once had a long talk on Northern Ireland with the president of the largest British corporation which is invested in there. He said to me, what did I think? I said we should get out, and he agreed. Our capitalists derive nothing. It costs the British military peasants alone. Costs £1 million a day. What type of colonialism is that? In what way does Northern Ireland... Let me finish, madam. In what way does Northern Ireland redound to Britain's glory? Not one whit. It has brought us shame and disgrace throughout the world, and it is best that we leave it. But I would say, let me continue. I would say, no, you're not. I'm not obliged to. Okay, if you insist.
I want to thank the gentleman, and through the chair, I will address my point of order. It seems that the gentleman is trying to convey the thought to this audience that it is a sectarian matter, when in effect it is an economic and a point of freedom for enslaved people. Secondly, my point of order through the chair, sir, is that I would like to make the point of order known that it is strictly an economic basis that England remains there because of the placement of nuclear missile heads in the northern part of Ireland, plus the offshore oil rights, which is what England is particularly interested in, and in particular, and now, as we know, the Falkland Islands. So let's make the point of order very clear,
Mr. Chairman,
through the chair, that it is not a sectarian matter. It is strictly a matter of freedom and
some degree, the Marxists. The Marxists have some truth in their analysis of what happened in Ireland up till quite recently. It is true that the gentry and aristocracy of Ulster sought to manipulate the Protestant working class, but the distinctive feature of the past 5 years has been the complete political castration of the Protestant gentry of Northern Ireland. It is now a working class battle between segments of the working class. But I would say in Britain's defense, though not justification, that it has to some degree been pushed into its extreme posture by the sheer weight of IRA terror. It has often been my regret that the IRA has gone in for a policy of inarticulate violence rather than a political strategy. The campaign which Mr. Bobby Sands ran this summer, for the first time, gave to the IRA widespread political following throughout the world and gave it great credibility in quarters it had never had before. What do? They return to their strategy of violence. And yet the great anti-colonial leaders such as Gandhi, Nehru, Jomo Kenyatta, Hastings Banda, better understood, indeed perhaps, better understood the nature of the British and sought to shame them into leaving their countries by adopting a political strategy rather than a strategy of violence, and those political strategies paid off. Furthermore, this side of the motion does not, I think, have an adequate conceptualization of what is the Irish Catholic identity. And I would say the essence of that identity is a duality which partakes in some degree of Irish nationalism, in some degree of recognition of belonging to a wider brotherhood of British nations. If you disagree with me, then why are so many thousands of Irishmen lying... Let me finish. Let me finish. No, I don't accept it. I don't accept it. If it has always been a history of hate, then why are so many tens and thousands of Catholic Irish lying dead and buried beneath the fields of Flanders?
They couldn't get a job.
Well, why? If they hated Britain, would they have gone and... Let me finish. I want to make a speech. I don't want to give you a question and answer session. I want to make a speech. Have a bit of mercy. Please, have some mercy and pity. Have some mercy. I want to finish. Let me speak. Why did they join as volunteers, the British Army, in tens of thousands? Why was Sir Roger Casement unable to recruit more than a handful of Irish prisoners of war to fight for the IRA in German prison camps? This side, however, of the motion, my side, does, I think, support the British government policy far too strongly. I believe that that policy, far from being colonialism or arrogant imperialism, has been one of weakness and fear. They have consistently bowed down in intimidated fashion to the threat of violence from the organized Protestant mass in the north of Ireland.
And that's another disgrace.
I agree it's a disgrace. I'm not denying that. I'm not defending the British government. I will not bore you with a recitative of the 50 years of Stormont rule in which Roman Catholic Irish were vested with so many humiliations. I will not defend the blundering of the British military, which in 1972 in one day made 342 arrests, none of whom were Protestant. I will not defend a blundering government. Above all, the point I criticized most, and this seems to me the key issue in the Ulster debate, is the fact that, greatly to his credit, the British Prime Minister in the early 70s, Mr. Edward Heath, was able to set up a power-sharing executive which involved both leading Prime Minister of Northern Ireland at one time, ordinary citizens, felt abandoned by authority and defenceless against the bullying of the new rulers of the streets of Ulster. Mr. Joe Haynes, political secretary to the British Prime Minister of the day, wrote, "We could only do such things in Ireland as the organised Protestant population were prepared to agree with. Therefore, I say that Britain should leave. 80% of the British people want us to leave Ireland. Parliament stays because it says the majority want it. But don't the British people also have some right to decide whether they want the Protestants of Northern Ireland belonging to their country? The United Kingdom is a very exclusive club. There's no room for fascists and bigots. The Protestants of Northern Ireland have been quick indeed to embrace the baubles and symbols of British rule. They have shown no love, only contempt for the values which some of us in Britain have always believed our country stood for: justice, democracy, and helping the underdog. They speak, in Northern Ireland, of Britain betraying the Protestants. My answer is that the Protestants have betrayed us. Neither side of this motion, to my mind, encapsulates the truth as I see it. This side support the spineless policies of the British government. That side have fallen for the cheap propaganda you get in the media here. I'm sorry, I may be accused of having been disloyal to my country. It is my belief that true patriotism resides in being honest about the faults of one's own country and rejoicing in its good things. I don't need the crutch of an overblown jingoism to help me tonight. Might I say, finally, that I hope that Britain will seek peace in Northern Ireland in accordance to the very best traditions it has shown in other spheres, rather than in accordance with the more negative aspects of its personality, which is shown at times to such ill effect throughout the world. Thank you very much.
I trust that those of you who also have watches realize that in keeping time, interruptions and responses to interruptions are not counted against the speaker's time. The fifth speaker, on behalf of the motion, will be Mr. Faust.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I find it very difficult to follow the reasoning, the ramblings and perambulations of Mr. Shaughnessy's position. O'Shaughnessy, excuse me. You should certainly get that right. We are not here tonight to sit as a body and hear this debate as mere policymakers. It is not the position of the Harvard Council that necessarily the British must withdraw all troops from Northern Ireland. That may be a good idea. But you need not believe that to believe that Harvard has affirmed the resolution. The resolution tonight says that the British government's treatment, and government is plural, it includes the past, it includes what the British governments have been doing to Northern Ireland and Ireland for many, many years. It says that the British government's treatment of Northern Ireland is an utter disgrace. We sit here not as a policy-making body to decide what course of action the British government should take, but as a court of justice. We are here to assign blame. We are here to assign moral guilt. Why is the situation in Northern Ireland as intolerable as it is today? Now, it strikes me that everything Mr. O'Shaughnessy said leads you to the conclusion that the British government's treatment of Northern Ireland has been an utter disgrace. I see no reason to debate this crossbench position. Instead, let me address myself to some of the other claims that have been made by the Oxford team and rebut them in turn. Question?
Yes, I see one difference in that Mr. O'Shaughnessy has distributed blame, where you seem to say that all of
would suggest that the British government is largely responsible, is the proximate cause for the conditions that exist in Northern Ireland. In addition, we believe we have isolated specific abuses of human rights as recognized by all the world, including Britain, which are taking place every day in Ireland under the control of the British government and the British Army. And those they are very much responsible for in every moral sense. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Information or order?
I will. Let me please continue and I'll deal with that as I go along. Yes, fine. A noted American columnist has written, human rights violations have put Northern Ireland on a par with some of the most barbarous regimes of the communist commissars and tin-horn Latin American dictatorships. The British are trampling on the rights of Irish citizens in a manner reminiscent of Oliver Cromwell's iron-fisted rule more than 3 centuries ago. One wonders if the British treated the citizens in the Falkland Islands the same way they treated their citizens in Northern Ireland, if indeed those people would be so unhappy to be under Argentine control. Indeed, you think that's funny. Evidence.
Of information, does the speaker know that 1,800 people is just one afternoon's work for the Argentine junta?
1,800 people have surely died in the repression of the British government in Northern Ireland. In addition to which, evidence from respected sources around the world suggests that per its 1.5 million person population, there is more human rights abuse in Northern Ireland today than in any other nation on earth.
Shame.
That is not Catholics.
Shame.
Did you say no that the number of people killed in Baltimore each day is twice as high per head of population than
The number of people killed in Baltimore every day are not slaughtered by the American government.
What I'm saying is that what you may classify as a human rights violation, what about the people in Baltimore that are getting killed? Why aren't you
I think that's an utter disgrace. I think that's an utter disgrace.
Well, then don't start apportioning blame there where the blame is obviously much greater.
Wait,
Why am I wrong?
sir, what is your point? There are certainly the treatment of blacks in the United States in the 1950s and 60s, and even today is surely an utter disgrace. That is not the question before this
What I'm
House.
trying to do is you're making a
Can I speak my...
you make a distinction between human rights violations and just violations
May I
which you
continue?
choose to ignore.
The gentleman from Oxford called for a spirit of conciliation. You don't get conciliation by denying basic human rights and by slaughtering people. That's just not the way to go about it. In that, Mr. O'Shaughnessy is right. Never, if the British government continues its present course, will there be peace in Northern Ireland. The gentleman suggests we didn't manufacture a Protestant majority in Northern Ireland. It was always there. That's like saying the all-white majority in the Mississippi legislature in the 1960s was always there, despite the fact the majority of the people in this state were black. It's what we call gerrymandering in this country. The 6 counties were torn from Ireland. That's not Ulster. Ulster is 9 counties. 6 counties were taken out of the heart of Ireland. And then, the Catholics who remained, many of them were chased away. The result, a gerrymander in which now the Protestants have control. And that, Mr. Chairman, is the basis of the problem. The gentleman from Oxford suggests that troops can't be expected to control problems without some casualties. But the casualties can't be human rights. There is no reason why the basic rights of Englishmen everywhere should be violated in order to maintain order. That is not a justification. Pope John Paul II, when he went to Ireland in 1979, said that the moral law, guardian of human rights, protector of the dignity of man, cannot be set aside by a person or group or by the state itself for any cause, not even the security or in the interest of law and order. Conditions presently in Northern Ireland violate at least 15, that's at least half, of the 30 provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the British government has signed. At very least, it seems to me, we could expect the British government to uphold the standards that it itself has told the world by signing the Declaration that it supports. And yet that is not the case. It has not been done. Instead, the result has been an attempt to shift pressure to more subtle situations and means. The Special Powers Act has been replaced by the EPA and the PTA, the Emergency Powers Act and the Prevention of Terrorism Act. The result, absolutely the same. Now, instead of simply being hauled in and held forever, you can only be held for 2 years. The resulting experience, you're taken in for 18 months, then right before your trial comes up, they let you out. You walk down the street, you look like a potential terrorist, and once again you're taken in. The result is no better.
Interrupt you for just a moment. Can you explain the provision of this act under which someone is hauled away without trial for 18 months?
Yes, the Prevention of Terrorism Act indicates we could, of course, get a hold of the law and see it if we needed to. I don't have a copy of it with me here. But there is no reason there need be no trial. There is no date under the 2-year limit in which a trial needs to be held, and arrest can be made without probable cause. Well, I'm sorry, that's what the law says. I suggest that the gentleman from Oxford should read it. Yes.
I'd like to inform the audience here that the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland can deem any act that he deems to be an act against the government. Anybody that he deems to be a criminal gets picked up and gets sent away. Any man deemed a criminal, deemed going to commit an act, the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland has the right to imprison that man without trial.
That's correct. And that's a provision of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was passed several years ago. Could I briefly?
Yes.
Yes.
How would you explain the holding of John Hinckley if we don't have a similar act, and I'm not aware of it?
In the first place, Mr. Hinckley was filmed shooting the President of the United States. Now, that may be a good idea, or it may be an utter disgrace, but that's just not the question before this body tonight. A lot of things in the United States are a shame, an utter disgrace. And if you want to hear me hold formal on that, I can go on forever. Please, could I finish?
According to what he was talking about, according to Richard J. Harvey, barrister at law in London, England, internment by remand is the name popularly given to the extremely lengthy pretrial detention periods under which an accused may frequently spend 18 months or more awaiting trial. There have been several instances of the police charging political activists despite having no evidence against them and leaving them on remand for long periods before withdrawing charges.
I think everyone in the audience is aware that the 18-month period is indeed the correct period. I ask you, please, if I could continue briefly, to remember that list of basic violations of human rights that Mr. Kaiser indicated to you. Arrest without warrant, imprisonment without charge or trial, no habeas corpus, curfew, meetings prohibited. You can't even say what you think in an open meeting in Northern Ireland, or you can be arrested. You can't speak your mind. There's no right of assembly. The meetings can be prohibited. And then there are those mysterious deaths and injuries in the prisons, the ones that there are no inquests on. The British response is often the same. They were self-inflicted. Of course, the British surgeons tell us that even the most avid contortionist would have difficulty rupturing his eardrums and performing other acts on himself necessary to produce the injuries we find in prisoners from H Block. It's just not reality, folks. And the last thing that I suggest that you all remember tonight that I believe is truly important is this. Whatever side you come out with on this debate, whether you believe that indeed the government of Britain has had policies which are utterly disgraceful with regards to Northern Ireland, or if you believe they're fine, you've been able to sit in the audience and hear people exchange views on the subject in a public forum. It's what we call freedom of speech in the United States. There are similar guarantees in Britain, except for one place. There's no similar guarantee in Northern Ireland. You can't speak your mind, because if you do, and if the government doesn't like what you say, there's a very good chance that you'll end up in H Block. And that's something to remember. Thank you.
The sixth and final speaker will be Mr. Haig.
Mr. Chairman, sir, ladies and gentlemen, may I say, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening. You've probably formed the impression by now that presidents of the Oxford Union are extremely pompous people, and so it falls to me to disabuse you of this impression. But I do want to dispense at the outset of what I'm going to say with the customary jokes that we make at the beginning of speeches in Oxford, because I don't think on this occasion that it would be suitable to make jokes. And after listening to some of the speeches that we've heard this evening, I am quite an angry young man. We are angry on our side of the House over many of the accusations that have been made against the British government. We are angry that we have heard of examples from the 1920s being given as though they applied to today. We are angry about statements like, you have a good chance of ending up in H Block if you speak your mind in Northern Ireland. Many facts have been ignored by the proposition side of the House. The internment without trial that they talked about was abolished in 1975. Indeed, I have covered my piece of paper with so many factual inaccuracies and errors in the proposition case that it is difficult to read what was written there originally. No, sir, I am not confused, and I hope you won't be by the end of what I've got to say. Because I haven't been involved in British politics for very long. I have for a few years. But I feel a great deal of support for the policies that have been pursued by the British governments that I've watched trying to grapple with the problems in Northern Ireland. And I do feel a certain sense of anger and bitterness when I hear British government's actions described as a disgrace, when British governments have spent the last 10 years trying to bring about power sharing between the communities in Northern Ireland, when they put billions of pounds of public money into Northern Ireland. And that is another reason why we are rather angry on this side of the House tonight. We had statements from the proposition like, we are here to assign blame, we are here to assign moral guilt, rather like a sort of inverted version of Ian Paisley. So, I think there are far too many people who try and pass judgment on this issue, far too many people who talk about Ireland, not the people in Northern Ireland, not the vast majority of the people who live there, but the people who love to debate it and assign guilt, who go on and on about the history of conflict and all the terrible things that have been done there, spend all their time doing that, refighting the battles of the past, instead of trying to find what might be a solution and what might be a basis for progress in the future. And so we tonight want to make quite clear that we not only reject the IRA and its revolting murders, we also reject the bigoted rantings of Ian Paisley and hardline Protestants in Northern Ireland. British governments have shown never-ending patience in recent years with the politicians and with the leaders of Northern Ireland in pursuing two principles, or one principle really, but it's two sides of the same coin. Recognizing the rights of the overwhelming majority of people there who want to stay in the United Kingdom, but trying to get the Protestant majority to recognize that the right to stay in the UK carries with it the responsibility to treat the Catholic minority properly. That was why in 1972 the Heath government abolished Stormont, to Protestant outrage and losing all the support of the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland. Yes, sir.
Just one point of information. You give a very noble picture of Britain. Roman senatorial referee factor in the supposed maelstrom of sectarian hatred in Northern Ireland. How do you explain the fact that your crack regiment of the British Army, namely the paratroops, shot into an unarmed crowd and killed 12 youths? After that, there was an inquiry by the British government on the auspices of one of your noble administrators, Lord Widgery, who has given a new word, as far as we in Ireland are concerned, to the English language. Widgerdom, in other words, total whitewash. Not one of those soldiers fired into an unarmed crowd was indicted or imprisoned or punished, as one of your previous speakers from your side of the question has claimed.
I think, sir, you have... I'm sorry to see that you have not been able to speak in the spirit that I was trying to speak in. I don't apologise. I don't try and excuse some of the actions of the British government and of many other people in Northern Ireland in the past. What I'm saying is that the actions and policies of British governments today and of recent British governments are the best hope of bringing peace to Northern Ireland and of that sort of thing not happening again. That is the case that I'm trying to put to you this evening. But if I can return to what I was saying, 1972 we had the abolition of Stormont to try and create a system of government in Northern Ireland where the rights of the minority would be recognised. 1973 a power-sharing executive was set up to govern Northern Ireland in which Catholics had to be included. That, unfortunately, was destroyed by the Loyalist strike in 1974. 1975, we set up a constitutional convention, elected by proportional representation, so that everyone would be fairly represented. But the Northern Ireland politicians in it were unable to agree on any form of government. 1982, we are now pursuing a new initiative, put forward by our new Northern Ireland Minister, James Pryor, in which a new elected assembly will have to have a 70% majority in order to agree on the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. Those are the efforts that the British government has been making to force people in Northern Ireland, the politicians of Northern Ireland, to learn how to live together. The last Harvard speaker said, "Never will there be peace in Northern Ireland if the British government continues on its present course." I would say that there will never be peace if it abandons its present course. There has been a concern throughout recent British government policy to try and bring the communities together, to preserve the rights of the Catholic minority, and to save lives. That's why proportional representation has been used in trying to bring them together. All the opinion polls, all recent opinion polls taken in Northern Ireland show that power sharing between the two communities and not any other option, including leaving the UK, is the most popular option for the people of Northern Ireland now. I was delighted to see in the Boston Globe of March the 20th, 1982, a report on the latest opinion poll in Northern Ireland, which said that 3/4 of all Protestants in Northern Ireland now want to remain part of the United Kingdom. You'll be surprised, perhaps. But it also said 2/3 of all Catholics in Northern Ireland now want to remain part of the United Kingdom, but with a power-sharing government of their own. And the Protestants too, a majority of Protestants, wanted a power-sharing government of their own. That is what our government has been trying to create. Yes, sir.
It might be very realistically that 95% of the people who live on Brattle Street today would like to remain under the Crown. Unfortunately, in the Revolution they chose to go to Canada instead of staying here in Cambridge? Would you have the British troops be here to protect them?
I don't think so. That would be a very feasible proposition. But it is a feasible proposition to defend the rights of the overwhelming majority of both communities in Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. There is no majority of Catholics for leaving the United Kingdom. There is no majority of Protestants for having majority Protestant rule and not power sharing. And that is what the British government is trying to bring about. But now let me refer to one or two of the points made by the proposition, being as I am the last speaker on this side of the House. Mr. Fouts said that there are things happening in Northern Ireland we in a civilised society would find difficult to believe. Well, yes, there are. And there are many actions of the Irish Republican Army which you would find difficult to believe. He said, Mr. Kaiser said, that there is no jury for acts of terror. Let me make this point so then you can come in. Mr. Kaiser said there is no jury, trial by jury, for acts of terrorism in Northern Ireland. Is he going to get to his feet now and tell me that there is trial by jury for acts of terrorism in the Republic of Ireland?
I don't.
No, because he doesn't know. And because if he did, he would be wrong. Because they can't have trial by jury for terrorist acts either. And the reason is that juries have been so intimidated by the IRA in the past that trial by jury has had to be abolished. They have complained on that side of the House about all kinds of restrictions about the Prevention of Terrorism Act, about terrorists not being regarded as political prisoners. Of course we're not going to give political status to people who have maimed and killed dozens of civilians on the British mainland and in Northern Ireland, because we do not regard that as legitimate political activity. Yes, sir.
I would like to know how many members of the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, are sitting in H block right now at the table.
All right! I do not know. I am informed on my left that there are several members of the UDA in that prison.
Excuse me,
Don't boo. I think the lady is entitled to a last memorial outfit.
But it is important to realize here, and I'm very happy the gentleman from Oxford brought the subject up, that the UDA does have a few men in prison. Well, let me tell the gentleman from Oxford through the chair this, that the Ulster Defence Association is recognized and armed by the British government, as well as the Royal Ulster Defence.
Can I ask who arms the honourable lady in the audience? I have 2 minutes. I take the honourable lady's point, but I have 2 minutes and I must proceed. The government of the United Kingdom cannot abandon Northern Ireland as long as there is a preponderant and stable majority there wanting to remain in the UK. It would be quite wrong to do so. It cannot, in honour, in morality, in practical politics, abandon 1 million people who wish to remain part of the UK. And I don't think it would be good for Ireland, for peace in Ireland, if Northern Ireland were to undemocratically become part of the Republic. I have met some of the Protestant and Catholic politicians in Northern Ireland. There are many people, many Protestant leaders in Northern Ireland and many of their followers who would be prepared to fight to the death, to resist becoming part of the Republic. There would never be peace in the Republic of Ireland for 1,000 years if Northern Ireland were to become part of that country. If Britain were to withdraw militarily, there would be far more bloodshed. If they were to withdraw politically, there would be absolute catastrophe in a country where the overwhelming majority of the people want to live in peace with one another, want to live in peace with the people on the next street as well as the people who live next to them. That's why the British government has tried to produce power sharing between the communities. why it's still trying, why there is an enormous amount of political support in in Britain for this policy to be pursued. Northern Ireland is just about the only area of politics in Britain where the two main political parties have a bipartisan policy, where they agree on what should be done. They agree that power sharing should be brought about. And so I'm sorry, I must finish now. So I don't think that we in Britain and we opposing the motion tonight have anything to apologise about. I don't think we have to make excuses for our government. I think we can say quite proudly that our government is doing what needs to be done, despite all the miserable history of that province for which Britain may well have been largely responsible for in the past. And it is on that basis that I oppose this motion tonight.
Speakers, having completed their formal presentations, we have about 10 minutes in which we will take brief 1-minute speeches from the floor. I hope you will not use this opportunity to make speeches to introduce points of order or points of information. I would first call for a speech in favor of the motion. The striped shirt.
A brief point that I don't need to come out this evening. We have had all the talk of Catholics and Protestants. This is how the press and custom refers to the two opposing sides, but I believe it does conjure up a slightly wrong impression, which is important to bring out in the United States. It's an understood thing in Ireland. What really, the definition of the two sides is not as sectarian as the titles imply. The distinction between the two sides comes from an old race distinction, by coincidence also a religious distinction, but it's an economic and a social distinction more than a religious one. It is a conflict between the haves and the have-nots, and to refer to them as Catholics and Protestants may just give a slightly wrong impression that we're medieval and fighting over religious beliefs. This is not the case. Thank you.
Now a speech opposed to the motion. Right here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to endorse Mr. Shaughnessy's position that we abstain on this motion. It's like most manners in which this issue is discussed, it's altogether too confrontational. But I would like to take issue with Mr. Shaughnessy's definition of the Irish Catholics. As one of the few here present, I would like to say that I think our position has not been very well represented. And it's with great concern that I watch this debate and watch some of the great minds of Britain and the great minds, I think, of America, represented at least by their institutions, Harvard and Oxford, debate this issue. I think we in Ireland would be a great deal better off without the very well-intentioned ministrations of both America and Britain. I think in the past, one of the most debilitating factors in Ireland has been the very fact that the Catholics in Ireland have had recourse, both morally and financially, to the US, and that the Protestants in Northern Ireland have had recourse to Britain and sought their solace there. I respectfully suggest to both the representatives of the British and American positions that if we in Ireland were left to solve the problem ourselves, it would certainly not be easy, but the chances would be a far greater one than those at present. Thank you.
Speech in favor of the motion. Someone who is not, someone way back there. No, just a friendly wave. Can I see those hands again? Right there, blue shirt.
Sir, I would like to make a point here. There's a mention of the Hitlock Court, where one judge can sit in judgment upon a member of the Nationalist Union shown that when young men or women were brought to trial in Northern Ireland by a jury of their peers, in the overwhelming majority of cases, these young men and women were released for lack of evidence and were freed. And the reason why the diplomat courts have been established in Northern Ireland is because the British government wants young political activists off the streets, and that's the prime reason and the only reason she wants them off the street and behind bars.
Any speech again? Right back. Mr. Wardley?
Mr. Chairman, sir, I think there is one plea that has not been made tonight. That is the plea of the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the political representatives of the majority of the Roman Catholic community. And those were the people who asked for British troops to protect them in 1969, when masses of Protestant thugs were attempting to destroy their and their communities' livelihoods. Since then, it has been them and the British government who have attempted to perform some form of compromise solution within Ulster. And every time it has been those of the Protestant majority and the Protestant groups under Ian Paisley who have tried to destroy, either through the Ulster Workers' Strike of 1974 or through bombing and terrorism. And I wish to say to one person who has made a point of information tonight that 450 Protestants are in Long Kesh today, one wing of the entire prison, and those people were put there by the British Army in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Secondly, that the group which is armed and protected by the British government is not the Ulster Defence Association, it is the Ulster Defence Regiment, an entirely different organisation. And that it is the plea of the people that we were talking to in Oxford but 3 months ago, Mr. Seamus O'Hanlon of the SDLP, that we bring to America and to those of Catholics in America this belief and this notion that there is a group of democratic and decent Catholic politicians who wish to cooperate with the British government and have cooperated ever since the abolition of Stormont, which was their first plea, and the first plea they have been granted. And therefore I think it is entirely unfair to grant to the British government the blame, which has been entirely the cause of the Reverend Ian Paisley and those Protestants who have refused to accept any form of democratic rights or human rights within Ulster.
We might now bring matters to a vote. I'll first ask for those in favor of the motion to say aye. Those who are against the motion will say no. I wonder if we could call for a show of hands. Those in favor of the motion. Those opposed to the motion. Those who wish to abstain. The chair rules that it's clearly a three-way tie. I am to indicate that you are all, that is, most all, welcome at a reception. The single exception being Mr. Duncan, who has forfeited his right to free food and drink at any event or in any institution under my jurisdiction.